to our 100 subscriber special. Thank you guys so much. I cannot believe we've got here. Please go grab some popcorn, get some drinks. This is longer than the movie probably. We will be discussing Thomas and Friends Blue Mountain Mystery.
Let's get started.
Yeah?
It was a busy day on the island of Sodor. Paxton was loading up a slate to take to the docks. All of a sudden, a rock fell from the top of the mountain and nearly hit Paxton. It was a keystone from Blondin Bridge, and Rheneas was on his way down. He wouldn't have to cross the bridge. Rusty and the others sounded the alarm, waiting for Rheneas, hoping he would stop. Rheneas heard the alarm, but didn't know why it was going off, until it was too late. Luckily, Rheneas made it across before the bridge collapsed, but nearly derailed when he was going down. He at last stopped right in front of Skarloey. They all cheered, but then they saw Paxton, who was covered in rubble and had to be sent to the diesel works to get fixed.
On Thomas's branch line, Thomas was pulling Annie and Clarabelle when suddenly Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle heard strange noises. Around a bend came a small red car on tracks. It was Sir Topham Hatt and Winston. Sir Topham Hatt informed Thomas that Paxton had an accident at Blue Mountain Quarry and needed repairs. So Thomas would have to take over his job, while Toby would take over the branch line. On the way to the Blue Mountain Quarry, Thomas saw Emily and Paxton, who was all dirty and damaged.
When Thomas got to the Blue Mountain Quarry, he met Skarloey and Rheneas. Thomas was surprised to see Rheneas so scratched up when Rheneas stated he needed a fresh coat of paint twice, which was a funny scene.
Yes, they were.
Skarloey tells Thomas to get to work when Thomas sees a mysterious little green engine. He tries to introduce himself, but the little engine darts off into the tunnel that Thomas can't follow him into. Shortly after, Sir Hannah pulls up to Thomas. Thomas asks him if he knows of a little green engine, but Sir Handel has no idea and tells Thomas that it was probably a runaway car, which we all know it wasn't.
How would that be good? Later, Thomas saw the green engine again. This time, he questioned Rheneas. Rheneas also didn't know and raced off into the distance. Shortly after, the little green engine again, and this time he questioned Rusty. And Rusty said it was probably a mountain goat and sped off, because that makes 100% sense.
Yes.
Then Thomas looked up at Merrick and asked him. He said no and quickly fell back asleep. Then Thomas looked up at Owen and asked him. He also said no and dropped the topic. A few seconds later, the little green engine was boxed in for a couple of seconds, and Thomas was able to figure out his name, Luke. Angrily, Thomas rushes to Skarloey and questions him. Here we learn that long ago, Luke did something really bad, so bad that he would be sent away from Sodor forever. So they hide him here to make sure that doesn't happen.
That night, Thomas asks the other engines about what could possibly do to get sent away from Sodor forever. They all told stories, but none of them were sent away forever, even though they did bad things. The next day, Thomas went to Skarloey and told him that he talked to his other friends. That made Skarloey mad, but since Thomas didn't really bring up Luke, it wasn't awful. And he told Skarloey that they were certain that nothing that anyone could do could get them sent away from Sodor forever. Shortly after that, Skarloey nearly got killed by Rocky, who was moving rocks into some cars. But Thomas told him to look out, regaining a little trust from Skarloey. Shortly after saving Skarloey's life, Thomas was approached by Luke, who apologized for being a jerk and asked him if he wanted to be his friend. Thomas gladly accepted the offer. After Thomas and Luke worked for a time, Winston came up to Thomas with Sir Topham Hatt and Mr. Percival. They were informing Thomas that he is to return to his branch line, and Paxton is fixed and ready to work again. After Winston left, Luke pulled up to Thomas and told him what had happened that was so bad. What happened was he knocked a yellow engine spoke a different language, which was Spanish, into the sea, and that engine was never seen again.
Apparently. Not confirmed. He couldn't confirm it.
Not confirmed.
Not confirmed.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. When Luke told the story, Paxton pulled up and heard the whole thing, but Scarloey blew his cover, and Thomas asked what he was doing, and he said he was grabbing the slate to take to the docks. When Thomas returned, he kept thinking about poor Luke and kept missing signals and switches. Shortly after, Thomas saw Toby and asked him to take over again so that he could help Luke. Toby agreed, not wanting to. Thomas set out to find the yellow engine and figure out what really happened. He checked Knapford, the shunting yards, the coastal tracks, even the garbage dump. But he didn't find a single yellow engine. Soon after, he met Edward to ask if he knew of any yellow engines. Edward didn't know of one, but Thomas to check the diesel works. At the diesel works, Thomas heard Paxton telling Devious Diesel, yes, he is devious in the movie, Luke's story.
Thomas quickly heads to the docks to ask Cranky what happened, and Cranky said that he couldn't understand a word that the engine said, but they took him to the steamworks, so Thomas rushed there. When he got to the steamworks, Thomas asked Victor if he had ever worked on a yellow engine that fell into the sea. Victor turned red, and he explained that it was him who was the yellow engine on the boat. And really, it wasn't Luke's fault. It was the storm's, because the storm broke the chains holding him to the boat, and Luke was really just bumped him, which caused him to fall into the sea. Thomas was surprised, and he rushed to tell Luke the others.
Now, Grant was very tired of the script, and he wrote everything so far, so don't give him a bad time. I'm going to try and summarize everything that happened. So Thomas goes to the Blue Mountain Quarry, tells Scarloey that he told Victor, but before he could tell him that he figured out the mystery, get it? Scarloey thinks Thomas has betrayed the narrow gauge trust, so they all rush up to the mountains to try and hide Luke. That's when Devious Diesel comes in with Paxton and starts yelling at Luke that that's the engine that's gonna pushes people into the sea, and he's gonna get him scrapped. Then Diesel tells Paxton to get Sir Topham Hatt. Well, Thomas tells Paxton to get Victor. While all that's happening, Thomas sees Rocky and asks him to load him onto Owen. Owen brings him up to the narrow gauge tracks, and Thomas is rocking back and forth, unable to fit on it. He goes out of control because he can't stop. He doesn't fit on. And then he makes a turn and is dangling off the thing. Luke comes in, couples him up, and pulls Thomas back to Owen. Once they get to Owen, Owen's chain snaps and they fall down Owen, laughing. That's when Sir Topham Hatt arrives. He starts saying, they start questioning him. Diesel tells him his half of the story, not the full story. And while that happens, Victor comes in, tells his half that Luke is innocent. Diesel gets in trouble for not telling the full story, and they all live happily ever after in Blue Mountain Quarry.
I really like this plot, and really, this is such a great movie. Such a great movie.
It's so beautiful.
So I really like this plot, and it had very little flaws. But like every movie, there are going to be those flaws. Mm-hmm. Those flaws are one. I think that they should have kept Luke as a character a mystery longer. Because they made him a mystery for, 1 minute, 2 minutes?
Not very most. They made more of the mystery what happened.
Yeah. And I think there should have been more mystery to what Luke actually did. I think they should have made that a bigger gap, because that was only, 15 minutes?
We learned half of it. We learned, what happened, Luke's side, at the very start of the movie.
I think there should have been a little more to that.
Yeah.
A little more detail. And it should have been longer. It should have been more like a mystery than I'm thinking this, and then 15 minutes later I know the answer after going through. Yeah. 3, I think they should have maybe had a side plot, like Paxton getting Sir Topham Hatt, Mr. Percival, and Victor. How does he convince them to go to the Blue Mountain Quarry? How does he what he did in the Diesel Works. How bad was he? Like all these or any other side plot. For I think they should have made it so Thomas doesn't be stupid and go on the narrow gauge tracks. Honestly, I don't know what they would have done other than this. I like the idea, but then it's just it's really dumb. Like he knows he can't go on there.
And he does it anyway.
And then he nearly falls off the cliff, and then Luke has to save him. It's just not very Thomas-like.
Yeah, it's...
That's more of a...
I get it. The personality's there. Thomas's personality, he wants to get them, but...
Right, but it's more of a clumsy thing. But overall, this movie... Like, really, this movie doesn't have any filler between the plots. Like... Other movies, for example, Misty Island Rescue, they're just like, they have this huge plot, but they need to make the movie longer, so they add like, I don't know, frosting to it. Just like, but the frosting tastes awful. But overall, I think this movie is probably the best CGI Thomas movie ever created.
The characters in this movie are awesome. Scarloey isn't some silly kid anymore like those later model season did. He's back to being a wise character and a leader for the engines. They even gave him a deep man voice just to prove that. Rheneas is also very funny. He keeps waiting for some new paint. And when he becomes yellow, I actually like the yellow. I think it looks very nice. I also know why they did it, and we'll bring that up later. Thomas is cheeky, but also determined. Diesel is devious. That is awesome.
The best part of the movie.
I know, right there. Every character is spot on, and I love them all. Well, besides Diesel.
Well, yeah.
Also, Duncan is an important. Duncan isn't in the movie because when they went to measure at the Tallyclin Railway to get accurate, so all the engine would be accurate to their real life counterparts. Duncan's basis was being overhauled, so they couldn't measure him, so he wasn't in the movie. So that is why they decided to repaint Rheneas yellow.
To replace Duncan, kind of?
Yeah, they added him again, and repainted Rheneas, but they added the yellow, so there would be a yellow narrow gauge engine. Okay, Grant.
Hope you guys enjoyed this movie review on Blue Mountain Mystery.
Link down below to watch the movie and our Discord server.
Thanks for 100 subscribers again. If you want to see more like this video, then
like, comment, and subscribe.